Alright, welcome back to another video. Today I'm gonna talk about parsing and my thoughts on parsing throughout this expansion. So I'm mostly gonna rant about why I lost interest and stopped parsing and why I think parsing is not what a lot of people think it is. Or functions how a lot of people think it functions. It's not really meant as a video of me asking FFLogs to make some change, or asking the community to change it, how they approach parsing or just anything. It's just me dropping some thoughts, pretty much. I don't know. So basically, parsing in this expansion, especially now, which this expansion is basically the only expansion that I've tried to take parsing seriously. I was like a casual PF enjoyer a little bit in Shadowbringers, and I never at all. I didn't even touch Radiant in Stormblood because I started playing at the end of Stormblood, and I wasn't really interested in Radiant. But basically the issue or the situation that I'm gonna talk about is the fact that when you're parsing in this game, so not speeds or anything, when you are parsing your RDPS, you are more reliant nowadays on the 7 people in your party and how they play and what they do than you are on your own performance, right? So once again, I'm not saying this is bad or needs to be changed. It's just how it is, and it's always going to be this way. It's just that the level of abuse nowadays of the things that I'm going to mention around this are really high. And a lot of people in the game don't really understand what goes into high-end parsing and all the things that can influence your RDPS. So I'm talking about it because I think I know, kind of, So most of these things from a speed player POV are not really going to be that interesting. Speeds in this game are fine, right? For the most part, this game is built to be played as a team, and that's the issue for personal rankings. But I don't really think there's particularly a big issue of speeds or anything, because with speeds, the whole point is that you play organized with the rest of your party. So once again, the issue is that for parsing, for your personal ranking in parsing, you are more reliant on the 7 other people in your party than you are on yourself. So the reason for that is mostly a combination. Well, it's a few things. A big one is RDPS. And this is mostly from the perspective of Dragoon, right? Because everything I ever make is going to be from the perspective of Dragoon. Because I don't care about other jobs. We don't like other jobs here. It's just Dragoon. So RDPS is a really big one. And then there's stuff like Sandbagging and resource runs, and maybe some other stuff that I'll think of along the way. This video is ridiculously unscripted, so bear with me. Just listen to this in the background or something. Thank you. So yeah, I guess I'll start off with the issues on RDPS and metrics. So RDPS is a really, really good metric. We got it in Shadowbringers with mostly the introduction of Dance Partner, or well, the introduction of Dancer, and the fact that if nothing changed, Dance Partner would just completely destroy parsing, right? You would just not be able to rank remotely high at all if you don't have a Dance Partner. Before that, we already had ridiculous padding with balance cards and everything from Astro, and some other stuff like Dragon Sight in Stormblood, which was pretty awful from what I've heard. I didn't touch parsing back then, but it seems awful. But we got RDPS, which mostly fixed it and seemed like a really great change. And I'd say it was a much better change with how kits and fights worked in Shadowbringers. But even then, it was kind of a time-based thing where over time people are going to understand how RDPS works more and what you can do to abuse it, I guess. So yeah, so we have RDPS, and then in Endwalker, I don't remember when, I think maybe at the start, we got NDPS as well. So what NDPS is it's your own DPS minus the damage you got from other people's buffs. So it's you can basically categorize it as it's the damage. It's like how well you played your job, right? Like supposedly, if we take variance out, if you have more NDPS than someone, on the same kill time of a fight, then that should mean that you just played better at your job than them. And then the difference with RDPS is that in RDPS, it's the same thing, but then you add in the damage that other people gained from your raid buff. So this only applies to jobs with a raid buff, which means that when you look at the rankings, all the rankings are by default shown in RDPS. But for jobs like Samurai, Dark Knight, etc., stuff that doesn't have a raid buff, you're basically looking at their NDPS, right? So like half the jobs in the game basically are already parsing in NDPS instead of RDPS, which isn't that relevant, but I just want to say it because a lot of people don't realize that. So yeah, RDPS is the same thing, but then it includes how much value you gain from your raid buff, like how much value other people gain from your raid buff. This is going to be so much rambling. And then very quickly, there's also ADPS and CDPS. ADPS is your own damage minus single target buffs. So raid buffs like Chain Stratagem or Embolden or whatever are still included, but stuff like Dragon Sight or Astro cards are removed. And then CDPS is the same thing again, but then just like RDPS, it just adds on the damage that other people gained from your raid buffs. So the only thing you ever touch ADPS or CDPS in is the job statistic page. If not that, then it's pretty much useless for the most part. Or at least like any information you'd want to gather from ADPS, you can just find in RDPS instead. So for parsing, there's basically two metrics, which is like for your ranking, which is RDPS and NDPS. I guess I'll very quickly explain why ADPS is like irrelevant for your ranking. So take, for example, the biggest offender, like the biggest issue of ADPS is Bard. Bard has Battle Voice, Radiant Finale, and there are 3 like rotating song buffs. Which means that throughout a fight, like if you do like an entire fight right now with Kieran gear, you gain like 400 or 500 DPS or something as a DPS job from having a Bard in your party. Which means that for ADPS specifically, the only difference between like if you copy and paste the exact same run, exact same crit RNG, exact same like buttons, everything, but in one of those runs you had a machinist and in the other run you had a Bard, the only thing that changes is that you gain 400 DPS for free. And that's just for Bard. Now, if you have like a comp of like fucking Samurai, Machinist, man, this is hard. Black Mage, there you go. I had to think of what job was missing. And then you have a Sage and White Mage, compared to someone else that has a like full buff comp, with like all the crazy buffs, you know. Like Astro single target buffs won't matter. And Dancer isn't that crazy either. Dancer still gives technical step, but like Devilment and Standard Finish don't count for ADPS. But the difference is like 1,000 plus. Like you gain like more than 1,000 DPS just because of the jobs that people in your comp decide to run. A lot of people make the argument that ADPS is a metric to see how well you played into buffs. Not really. Like, yes, if you and someone else have the exact same party comp, then technically, if you did more damage than them, it could mean that you played into buffs better. But I wouldn't count on it. Like, if you want to know who played into buffs better, simply go on the like damage done tab of your log and hover over the RDPS, and then it tells you how much damage you actually contributed to other people's buffs. Because, I don't know, ADPS is really not a useful metric outside of just the job statistic page. If you want to know the balance in between jobs, then you look at like CDPS and ADPS, but that's the only thing. So moving back to the metrics that are real, which are RDPS and NDPS. So basically, RDPS is kind of bad for parsing, but the issue is that for the majority of parsing, the only reason that NDPS is better is because we play around RDPS. Well, except for the top end. At the top end, even if RDPS never existed or anything, I still think NDPS is way better, which I'll explain. But first, the first part. So the problem with NDPS that a lot of people say, right, is that if we parse for NDPS, if like NDPS is the main metric or the only metric or whatever, you do not at all need to care about when you press your raid buff, right? You would just press your raid buff when it's optimal for you. So Dragoon, for example, you could use your opener battle litany before chaotic sprint because it's better for you, but on average it's going to be worse for everyone else. And then a bigger example is that altogether, instead of using your 2-minute buffs in your opener, you can just assume that a kill time is not going to lose a usage. You can just hold your 2-minute buffs all the way until 1 minute into the fight, or like 30 seconds in the fight. You just hold all your buffs until 30 seconds, which means that all your life windows are going to be buffed. Well, they're always all going to be buffed. But basically, it means that you're not wasting like the 2-minute buffs in your opener. It means that at most you'd be wasting like, you'd still have your 60-second buff in your opener where you don't have a life window. But other than that, you're able to shift your life window into your like all of your 2 minutes, which would be better for you. And if we were parsing NDPS, you could simply join some random like clear PF or anything parse PF. You could do this, and then even though you technically might have played awful, because realistically everyone's going to be doing all their stuff in their opener, right? And for some silly reason you held battle litany until 60 seconds, where it gained like considerably less value and your RDPS would have been much worse. But it's better for your personal rotation. It makes you do more potency, so it's better for your NDPS. So that's the issue that people like say with NDPS, and it's true. It's why I say that NDPS is only a better metric because we play around RDPS. Because if this was a thing, then yeah, you would have people just going into random parties and completely griefing because it's either they see it in like top logs or I don't know, like they thought of it themselves and they're like, okay, this is optimal. So now what does it change that we play around RDPS is that, so currently in like my, like, I don't know, I've made like a DSR guide and stuff and like I make some videos, right? I make some videos, yeah. But basically I would never tell someone to not do their battle litany at like a quote unquote like standard timing, right? Like you should always do your battle litany at a standard timing, and then the rest of your rotation is going to be optimized around keeping that there. You're not going to move your battle litany because at like the most important thing is that your raid buff is still aligned with other people. Now, an issue that RDPS does have, and NDPS also has this, is that you do not get rewarded for playing into other people's buffs at all. Like ADPS supposedly has that. There's no way to fix this, by the way. Like as I said, this whole video is just like me explaining some stuff and giving some thoughts, but I'm not like offering an alternative or anything. I don't think there's like an easy way to fix this at all. It's just how the game is and how parsing is. But you are not personally rewarded for playing into other people's buffs. You are rewarded for using your buff, your raid buff, when other people are about to press buttons. But if I press a action during like 20 raid buffs, or if I press an action during 0 raid buffs, my RDPS and my NDPS both won't change for that. The only thing that changed my RDPS specifically is how hard people are pressing buttons in my raid buff. Now, the nice thing about RDPS is that for the most part, right, if you're in PF or something where you don't know what people are doing, you're just going to have to press your battle litany at the expected time, like the standard timings where people are supposed to be bursting, so you don't miss anything that they do. Because moving it around for personal gain is basically never going to be worth it because party alignment is way, way more important. Now, this is good because currently, while you're having to do that, it means that NDPS is actually a very good metric because everyone has to use their RD or their raid buff at a normal timing, right? Like, if you're going to a savage fight, everyone's going to be pressing battle litany at the same time. So the only thing that affects your NDPS at that point is how well you play your rotation around that, right? Like, you're forced into standard timings, but the optimization you do within that is what increases your NDPS. So it genuinely is like a metric of your personal skill in that sense. Whereas if you do the same thing, but you look at RDPS, which is what Parsing for the most part is currently, suddenly, instead of just having what NDPS is, because you're forced into the same timings anyways, you are now also looking at how much damage people did in your buff for no reason, really. So, for example, like a Dark Knight by default is going to do like 150 or like 200 or even more DPS from your battle litany. So from one Dark Knight, you're getting like 200 RDPS, whereas one Paladin or one Warrior is going to give you like 100-ish. I barely look at parses at the current tier, so I don't know what the exact numbers would be for current gear. But like, just as an example, right? Having one Dark Knight in your party without like any thinking or anything special at all, similar to how ADPS works, you are already just gaining 100 DPS. Now you can have a second Dark Knight, because for the most part you're never gonna need LB anyways for the sake of parsing. So the LB gen doesn't matter. So you can have two Dark Knights that are both doing ridiculous amounts of contribution to your battle litany. Then you have cases like Summoner over either of the other two casters, where Summoner basically does like 100 more too in most cases. And then you have Ninja and Samurai, where both of those, it's like edges a bit more towards Samurai for the most part. I mean, depends. They're both like super close in how good they are. But having one of those two jobs as your co-melee on Dragoon compared to having a Monk or a Reaper, and the same goes for like if you're a Ninja player and you have a Dragoon instead of a Samurai, it's also like a ton of DPS, right? So basically, if you look back at the comparison between RDPS and NDPS, you could have like a really good optimized rotation where both players are using battle litany at the same time because they're forced into it because, you know, they don't know what other people are doing. So you just press it at a standard timing. But one of them had like the worst comp possible for buff contribution, and one of them had the best comp possible. And they're just gaining like 500 RDPS for no reason, right? Well, there is a reason, but that reason is not their own efforts. That reason is that they queued in with 7 people playing jobs that are good for them. So at a baseline, like that's one issue of RDPS and how NDPS is actually a really good metric within like that world. If you take away RDPS, then we already explained that people can start abusing NDPS in its own right, which is actually kind of becomes a good thing later on because you can abuse RDPS way harder. But I'll get into that. So for most people, and I don't want RDPS to go, so I'd say NDPS is a good metric because RDPS like exists with it. So talking about how hard you can actually abuse RDPS, right? So the first thing I want to say is going back to the example of abusing NDPS, which is that you can, on Dragoon, because Dragoon is like a big example of this, since your opener is so shit, you can move your raid buffs, or like you can move your like opener buffs to 30 seconds or 60 seconds or whatever you want for a fight, to make sure your like no life window burst in your opener doesn't catch as many buffs. And it's like a significant gain for you, right? Now, if you do that alone, then your RDPS is going to suffer because you're just going to miss a ton of people's bursts of your battle litany. However, nothing is stopping you from just telling the 7 other people in your group, just move your burst to 1 minute, right? If you simply tell the other 7 people in your group to follow the same thing as you do, Now, some jobs are also going to gain from this, but most jobs are not necessarily going to gain from this. Especially like, I mean, it kind of depends, right? Like, let's say you could kill at like, I mean, okay, it's hard to give a like perfect example because Dragoon is actually good at a lot of kill times, but TLDR, even if other jobs are not gaining DPS from it, you could tell them to move their burst so that it fits along with the burst that you want to do. Now this can go a lot more in depth, right? You can literally just assume that a fight doesn't force you to like press your raid buff on cooldown to not lose a usage. You can make up whatever burst timings you want. Like, as long as you're not losing usages of anything, you can make up any burst timing you want, similar to how you would play in NDPS. And as long as you tell the other people in your party to burst at the same timings, you're not losing any RDPS, right? So you can abuse that you can do in NDPS, you can still do the exact same thing in RDPS. It just relies on the 7 people with you doing the same thing as you. Now, where it actually gets worse than NDPS is the fact that along with being able to do the same thing as NDPS, you can also even further abuse the amount of contribution you're getting. So I already said that the jobs that people play in your party affects like a lot how much DPS you're going to gain from them. For example, like Dark Knight being absolutely basically required, right? Like, you gain so much damage from a perfect party composition nowadays that for you to realistically parse and like even remotely try, let me say that, for you to even try like towards the end of a Savage patch to get like a rank 10 parse without absolutely like blasting your crit rate, for you to even try and get a top 10 parse nowadays, you are fully required to have like a perfect party composition or like maybe like 1 or 2 jobs missing just for the battle litany contribution. If you queue in with like a mediocre composition or just players that aren't bursting that well, you are already just disqualified basically. And considering how little people in this game already like care about parsing at all once they get their best in slot, it basically means that additionally with all the further steps of padding that I'm going to talk about, at just this point for most jobs, and this mostly, like the jobs where this really, really matters a lot is like Dragoon, Astro, Ninja, like the ones with really valuable raid buffs, right? Like Dancer as well. There's stuff like Reaper where on Reaper it doesn't matter too much because your raid buff isn't like crazy value. And like on Monk it's still, I mean on Monk it's very important too, to be honest. So yeah, on most raid buff jobs you basically cannot aim for a certain ranking. Like you're just, at a certain point you're basically just cut off due to the comp you're playing with. Now then, so the first thing that adds to your contribution is the comp. But furthermore, there's nothing stopping people from doing basically non-standard, I guess you could call it, burst windows in your raid buff. So let's say you're trying to parse, right? You go into like a strike and dummy fight basically. I'm gonna use P1S as an example because like let's just say you're doing like a 6-minute 30 fight, right? Like super standard. It's just a strike and dummy for 6 minutes, right? You're just going to keep pressing your battle litany. You use it at like 5 seconds and then 2 minutes later and then 2 minutes later and then 2 minutes later. Now, assuming you have good players, you're just going to get like the natural burst windows that are supposed to happen with those jobs. But all these people are still playing the game for themselves. Now, what you can do is you can basically make it so none of these people are playing the game for themselves anymore. For example, like, how you do this exactly depends, but basically you start making people overcap their gauge, right? Like a samurai can make it so they go into every single burst window with full Kenki and like double Shoha in every like 20-second buff. I think they can do that. I don't know, honestly. They can probably do that, surely. Ninja can hold every single Bunshin for 2-minute buffs. I don't know, thinking of examples of this is hard in the moment. But basically, there's a lot of jobs that have some form of gauge that they... Normally, it won't align perfectly for them to use every single thing in raid buffs. Like, Dragoon is an example, right? Dragoon is not always going to have 2 life surge in raid buffs. Now, if Dragoon was actually a good job for, like, pattern people, which it isn't, but if it was, you could further improve that by also doing 2 life surge in every single burst window. I mean, it's another example, right? You can do 2 Wormwind Thrust as well in every single burst window if you wanted to. Even further, basically every single job can add like an easy like 300 potency to every single raid buff by simply, for example, if you're playing like a 2.4 fight, like a somewhat fast GCD raid, all you have to do to gain a shit ton of potency in the raid buff is just wait, just go AFK, right? You just, right before the raid buff goes out, you just go AFK, you wait for the buff to apply to you, and then you hit your GCD. Because by doing this in battle litany, like in 15-second buffs, you're basically guaranteeing that you're always going to hit 7 GCDs instead of 6 GCDs. It is super rare due to like alignment, right, that you're going to get 7 GCDs naturally. Even if someone is playing like a 2.4 GCD or something around that. But if you play around it, it becomes super easy. And this inflates your RDPS by like a ton. And you might think that nobody actually cares to do this, but trust me, at the top end of parsing, people abuse crazy amounts of shit. So this is why at like the top end, RDPS is actually like way, way worse than NDPS. Because not only can you do the exact same thing as NDPS, where you just get to choose where you burst based on your own personal gains, but on top of that, other people can also just completely scuff their own rotation and overcap everything just to put more in your buff and like inflate your buff contribution to an amount that a player in a normal party is never going to get close to. At which point, I would not say that has anything to do with your skill at all. So that's like my issue with RDPS basically. And then moving on to the next thing is like an issue with parsing is sandbagging. Sandbagging has always existed. Like it's always been good in this game, right? But it's kind of just become really common for people to do it nowadays. What sandbagging is that, for example, if you naturally would kill a fight at like 7 minutes and 40 seconds, you just tell one of your friends in the party, hey, can you stop hitting the boss? Thank you. And then suddenly you kill the boss at 8 minutes and 20 seconds. Which is coincidentally right after your final 2-minute burst. So basically the whole idea is that you make people go AFK for like the entire fight or like parts of the fight. Like you control the kill time to land exactly where you would gain the most value, like the highest potency per second for the fight. Now this has 2 issues. The first issue is that once again it's just further like alienating people who don't have groups doing this. So let's say you're parsing Dragoon. The first thing you need is you need like 7 people playing the right jobs and then preferably playing their jobs well and bursting into your buffs well. I mean, if you want to go for like rank 1 nowadays, you basically need them to like just scuff their own rotations for you so they do more damage in your buffs, like even more damage. But ignoring that, like you just need 7 people playing the right jobs. Then you also need 7 people, out of which, 1 or 2 of these people are willing to sandbag for you to increase the kill time to the point where you get the most damage, because this is like very influential as well for your total DPS. So that's already 2 things that a lot of people are never going to bother with or care about or have like the opportunity to, because you basically need to be in a semi-static or friend group to like be able to do these things. I mean, nowadays even in PF it happens, which I guess I'll talk about in a second, but yeah, I think it's really bad for that reason. And then the second reason why I think sandbagging is really bad, 1 second, I had to take a sip, I was dying. So the second reason why I think sandbagging is really bad is because there's like no creativity in your rotation anymore, right? Normally half of what causes like scenarios where you would optimize your rotation is kill time. Like 1/2 for most jobs is downtime, and then the other half is kill time, because those are the two things affecting how like your like how much leeway you have on your OGCDs and when you have to use your OGCDs and everything. So the thing that makes it so you can be creative with how you do a fight and like be able to optimize it is kill time. If you sandbag every single fight to end like right at the end of your burst window, you're just gonna press buttons on cooldown every single time. Like I uploaded 2 videos like 2 weeks ago of the optimal rotation for like approximately a 6:30 kill time and then approximately an 8:30 kill time. It's basically the exact same rotation, and it applies to like every single kill time. The only thing you change is like the final minute usually, and that's just all you do. Like there's nothing that's gonna change ever. You just do that rotation over and over again. If you can do that rotation, you can play perfectly in any sandbag fight, assuming it's full uptime. So that's my other issue, is that you're just not like given creativity or anything at all. And then the next thing that I'm going to talk about is that, as I said with PF, I think it's become really toxic in Party Finder, and Parsing in Party Finder has always been like a toxic environment, which is not shocking at all. But I think nowadays it's just kind of it turns me off personally how you'll see people who are like getting into parsing, they're new to parsing, and the first things they do is they'll make a PF and they lock out like half the jobs in the game. They lock like one specific comp of jobs that is the best, that is like the rank 1 comp, right? And then they say someone sandbags. Yeah, they're like, okay, we'll rotate sandbags, and like maybe they'll do some like fucking like optimized strats to gain 1 GC. I mean, that stuff is fine, right? My issue is the first 2 things where they'll lock comps and they'll do stuff like sandbagging or resource runs. Now, my issue with that is that a lot of these people just skip the optimization part nowadays. Like a lot of people who don't understand how to play their job properly, or don't care to like think about their rotation or anything, they'll start parsing, they'll get like subpar results, they'll maybe get purples or something, and they're like, you know, how can I increase my damage? And then instead of looking into like the rotation of other people or like how they can improve their own rotation, they'll just see, oh, this person's getting like 1,000 more battle litany than me, and oh, this person's getting like an entire burst window extra like 30 seconds after I kill the fight. And then they just copy that, because those are the 2 things that are way more influential than your actual rotation. And most likely the rotation they're doing is the same as rank 1 anyways, because most people, even at the top nowadays, care more about, you know, abusing funny stuff instead of like optimization. I mean, that's not my issue. Like, rank 1 is always going to be just whoever gets it, right? Like, crit is in this game. I mean, I think variance is a lot less influential than some people think. Some people think that like job optimization is completely like meaningless, but from experience I can say that it definitely, like, the fact that it increases your average run will play a lot into how much you're farming for variance. I don't know, like, I'd say that optimization actually means a lot in this game, even the small things. But in the end, I do think that even for parsing, optimization should always be a personal interest. If you want to parse, you just want to kill the boss, like, you just want to chill with like friends maybe and parse, you don't have to care about optimization. I'm not saying everyone should care about optimization. That's not the point of this video. I'm just talking about stuff. Right. I'm not sure if there's really even that much more to say. I mean, resource runs are another issue, and right now there's a poll on FFLogs that's kind of causing some drama. At least people are talking about it a bit, which primarily started because people started doing the equivalent of resource runs on DSR, although you'd call it carryover runs generally because it's not the same thing really, and that's like the word that people use for it. So what is a resource run? A resource run is when you kill for like it's with door bosses basically, where when you have a door boss in this game, the game doesn't actually force you to restart after you kill the door boss, even though you get the checkpoint. So what you can do is you can max out your gauge, like your on Dragoon or Reaper, it matters the most, right? Where you get like the stuff that you normally wouldn't have in your opener. I mean, Reaper kind of does, but still. You just get to have like a crap ton of maxed out gauge and just pump out extra damage because you didn't reset after the first phase, the door boss. Which, I mean, I think that, so let's give my thoughts on the poll, right? Because I'm talking about my thoughts anyways. So regarding the poll, I do agree that, so in my opinion, resource runs should be a separate category at best, maybe. Otherwise, they shouldn't touch it at all. Like, I don't think resource runs should be banned, but I think that they should probably be a separate category. Because I think resource runs are only healthy for speed kills. Or maybe if they could somehow do it, then make it count for speed, but don't make it count for parsing. But, I mean, at that point, it's kind of like cherry picking, maybe. Because it's not like resource runs are necessarily, like, some jobs basically don't benefit from it at all besides kill time, possibly. But yeah, so, because the issue of resource runs, right, is that you once again just get inflated DPS because your group decided to do something. I wouldn't say, like, resource runs are basically never harder. Like, it requires consistency. It's harder to farm kills when you're doing resource runs. But for certain jobs, like especially Dragoon and Reaper, the amount of damage you gain from doing a resource run, you'd have to like seriously fuck up. Like if you do the exact same rotation in phase 2 raid, you gain a ton of DPS. You gain actually just a crap ton of DPS to the point where a resource run and the normal run are just like, they should not be ranked the same, right? Because it's completely unfair. You're never going to compete with them. And even if you're beating them, it's only because they played so incredibly badly compared to you. And in like realistically, you should be way further ahead of them. So yeah, but I mean for speed kills, resource runs are good because it's just like a different thing, right? Instead of like having another strike and dummy fight, you get to actually think about like, oh, which job gains the most from having resources, and you also need a lot of consistency to be able to do it often, and it's just different. So for speed kills, it's fine. But yeah, it's just once again, right? The final turns of Savage are always the worst case of just everything that I've been saying, because you need to do a resource run with a perfect comp, and in the case of like the current tier, for example, you also need to sandbag to the right kill time. All these three things need to be done. If you do none of these things, you're not even competing. Like, you are so far below people who are doing this. It's like the amount of damage they gain is unreal. Like obviously Dragoon and Reaper gain like a shit ton, and then I mean from like combination of this fin, basically every job is gaining something from something. So on DSR is a bit different because, and as far as I could see, the FFLogs devs didn't even mean to make it this way. But on FFLogs, it doesn't actually remove, because the checkpoint is set between phase 1 and phase 2. I'm going to assume you know what DSR is. I'm not going to explain that. I've barely explained like anything in this video. So I just assume you know things, honestly. So the checkpoint is set between P1 and P2, but the time taken for P1 and your like damage output in P1, like it just counts, right? It just treats the fight as having P1 included. So it's very different. Some people make the argument that because it changes how you play the fight only for phase 1, right? Well, okay. Because you still need to play phase 1 well, I guess, is the argument they have, is why it should be like allowed. And it should be like kept in the rankings, because you still have to optimize like around this run specifically, which doesn't really make sense to me. The issue I have is that the potential and even like the standard output on some jobs for a carryover run then is just higher than what you're gonna get on like a normal run, right? Like on Dragoon, for example, if you do a carryover run, you're gonna do more damage than a normal run would, unless you're like inting, which is possible, but still. I mean, ultimates are like a massive case. Like ultimates, I've been parsing a lot of ultimates this expansion now, right? Like after I stopped parsing Asphodelos, the only thing that I really actually parsed is that I did Party Finder DSR. I also I did a crazy amount of optimization for both DSR and the Omega Protocol top. I don't know why I said the whole name. Why not? So I did a ton of optimization for both. I still did optimization for both Savage tiers. Although I could go more in depth on P9S, and I still might, but I just don't have motivation. Because the only thing I'd have to look at is like skill speed, like GCD tiers and how they function and align with stuff. And ICBA. Anyways, so I did a lot of DSR PF parsing, which is some of the most fun parsing I've had for a lot of reasons. So one of the reasons that people like tend to say that ultimate parsing is irrelevant, and it's largely true. I think DSR and top to some extent, but especially DSR is a pretty big exception because it doesn't have the same level of like straightforward padding that the other ones do. Like UCOB is an absolute joke because you just have golden buff that is not removed for some reason. And then Uwu has some AoE padding that, you know, you can abuse it and gain like too much damage to a point where it influences your parse too much overall. T is the same with Doles, and that's about it. I mean, I think kill time extension on that fight also helps quite a lot. And then DSR is very good and top is like alright. So, but the only reason that parsing DSR feels good, okay, so there's two things to it, right? First, you have the fact that with DSR, the amount of potency you gain, and that's true for basically every ultimate, because the fight is so long and because the fight is so like non-standard, right? You have so many downtime things, and like you have certain static phases that always last the same amount of time, and some of them are kill time based. There's all these factors. There's like small bits of AoE and things. You have so much optimization in these that on a lot of jobs like Dragoon, for example, the amount of damage you gain is so significant for once that you'll actually considerably outparse people that are doing like less of a good rotation than you. So that's one thing. However, on the opposite end, because of how like these fights work, and I have so many different downtimes and so many different phases that can be extended or shortened, and like just so many things you can organize as a group, and they have these short phases of padding as well. They can also be completely destroyed. Like I've said this before, and if you want to see an example, look at the Chinese FFLogs, which has it for DSR. But I've said before that I think the limit of how much DPS you could do, like RDPS S Dragoon on DSR, is probably around like 8.3k or 8.4k. If you go like above and beyond complete degen, right? Like you basically have 7 bots that you just tell them exactly what to do for your parse, right? And you do a carryover run. My personal PB at the moment is like 7.84 or something, which is about as high as you can really go. I mean, that run has an LB3, but I don't know, like that run is also like obviously one of my peak runs, right, in terms of like variance. Like it's well played, but obviously your best run is always going to be pretty good variance. But realistically, you're going to do like 7.8k at best if you're playing really well in PF. So with like not kill times oriented to you and not people doing ridiculous amounts of damage in your raid buffs. But anyways, that was a tangent, but it was part of what I'm talking about in the video anyways, so it's fine. But yeah, I really enjoyed DSR parsing because of it's like there's 400 times more optimization in that single fight than like all of Savage combined almost this expansion. And on top of that, because people don't really abuse like parsing strats as much in ultimates, because like no one like cares, right? Until right now. Because right now people are bored. But for the most part, people never cared because like, you're not gonna do it for an 18-minute fight. You're not gonna make people sandbag for you in an 18-minute fight, or like other stuff like that. Like usually people just don't really care. So not only were my parses feeling fair, like me parsing in PF, like me just going into a PF and playing as well as I can around like standard timings and stuff. It felt like my parses were fair, but like other people's parses in comparison were also like everything was just streamlined, right? Nobody was getting crazy advantages over other people. And that was like nice. Like it's actually almost refreshing for once to see a fight where you can just clearly see, okay, this person ranked here, and then you look at their rotation and it's like, okay, they made like X amount of like mistakes, they lost about this much potency. Like you can see like, okay, yeah, they played like a bit worse than the person like above them. And your DPS, because the fight is so long, and especially on a job like Dragoon doesn't have that much variance or anything. On Dragoon, your DPS in this fight is going to be very consistent. So it's really cool to me. You know, it's really cool. I do want to say, I'm getting close, I think, to the end of this video, because I'm running out of things to talk about. I am like happy with, because this video is supposed to be about my experience of parsing, I guess. I guess I can talk about my actual parses, which is that the 3 times that I actually like parsed something, which is Asphodelos, DSR, and top. Although top is hardly because like I didn't really farm it or anything. But like I'd say these are the 3 times that I did something where I was best in slot, and I was like, you know, it was like a competition basically. For all 3 of those, on the main patch, so 6.1 for Asphodelos. Wait, is that true? I don't know, like 6.0 or something? I don't fucking know. The first patch of Aspho, the first patch of DSR, and the first patch of top. For all 3 of those, I did get rank 1 Dragoon on NDPS. For none of those did I get rank 1 Dragoon RDPS. Am I salty? I mean, I don't really care. Like, I cared about it a bit when I didn't get rank 1 for Asphodelos at the time, but nowadays I'm just, like, I think everyone grows out of parsing, right? It's kind of just how it is. I don't know where I'm going with this, but like I recommend trying parsing once. I think it's nice. But I think it also will, like, the first time that you seriously parse something will teach you so much about how little it's in your control that it's also going to make you not care about it in the future. Because nowadays I'm never going to parse again. I don't think so. Unless I happen to have a tier where like maybe the Dragoon rework is really fun and they stop making striking dummies as every Savage fight. Maybe like the first Dawn Trail tier I'll actually like get like 300 kills or something again, but I doubt it. But yeah, it's not to say that I think parsing is a bad thing, that other people shouldn't care about parsing. If you enjoy it, go for it. It's fun. Like, it's fun to just bash your head against the fight, honestly. But I do definitely recommend, if you can find it in yourself, if you can find the interest in yourself, try to actually like optimize fights for once, right? I think it'll, in the long run, it'll make you a lot happier, right? Because for me, if I look back at like Asphodelos, for example, right? Every single fight nowadays, I can find things that I could think of things that I could have done better. But I'm still proud because like at the time, the rotations I was doing in each of the fights were better than what other people were doing, which I'm happy about. Like I think I deserve being rank 1 NDPS for that tier, and the same goes for DSR and top. Top especially, I went super hard during Prague on optimizing top, and I didn't grief, trust me. I swear. I'd say I'm pretty good at Prague, you know? Anyway, I went super hard on top. But I can look back, like I think it's both cool that I can be proud of the fact that I believe I played better than other people during the tier. But I can also look back now, and I definitely know a lot of mistakes I was making back then. Or not necessarily mistakes, but things that I could have done better. For example, the whole like 630 rotation video that I posted of like double Mirage dive, I I'm pretty sure. I don't know when I uploaded the video, the first one. I'm pretty sure I thought of doing double Mirage Dive at the end of Asphodelis maybe. But for some reason I never like connected it with like rushing your final life window. Or for some reason I thought it pushed your final life window too far. To where it wouldn't be relevant at like a 6:30 kill time for some reason. I don't know, I was stupid. Like for some reason I thought the like final edge of doing double Mirage Dive was at 30 seconds. Or like it had to be at least 30 seconds, right? So it had to be at least 6 minutes and 30 instead of what it actually is, which is like 6 minutes and 23. But like, yeah, I should have been doing that rotation, and that is like a serious gain, right? Like, in terms of translating the potency to actual DPS gain, every single P1S run I did would have been about 30 DPS higher if I did that rotation instead. Which might sound like it's nothing, right? Because even for me, my PB on P1S is like 80 DPS above my second best run. But that's basically always how it's going to work with variance in this game, especially if you don't farm a crazy amount of kills on a fight. But that doesn't change the fact that your PB would have also been 30 DPS higher if you did that rotation. That's important to keep in mind. But yeah, so for like every single fight, as I said, right? Well, I'm not sure. Like, I'm pretty sure that on P2S you could have done Piercing Talon pre-pull, and it should have been better. I'd have to actually look at that. That's just like me taking a guess, really. But it makes sense. Or, well, it's like kind of dependent on some stuff, but it could be better. And then for P3S, the thing that I thought of is that you really should have just always aimed to end the ad phase with Mirage Dive already like ready, and then do a double Mirage Dive window for both your opener, like your re-opener after the ad phase, and then every window after, and then you can also rush your final life window faster. That should have basically always been a gain. And then for P4, there's not really. I mean, you could do double Mirage Dive again. That would have been sick, to be fair. Doing double Mirage Dive resource run. That would go crazy, because the kill time for that is like the same. But yeah. Anyways. Do I have anything else to say? I'm not sure. I don't even know how long this is. This is probably close to an hour by now. Yeah, I mean, I think that's everything. If you have any questions about anything, just leave a comment. This is like a Giga Rant video. I'm not sure if anyone got anything constructive from this at all. I'm not sure if I'm going to upload this, but you'll find out. So thank you for watching, and see you next time.